Hello everyone, and welcome to the first live stream of the summer break, the famous Formula One summer break. The 4 weeks in which, or 3 weeks I think it is, in which nobody's allowed to do any work, nobody can answer the phone, you can't reply to messages. Yeah, right. Anyway, I hope if you're away doing something fun, having a holiday, hope you're enjoying yourself. If you're still working, commiserations, but hope you're having fun anyway. Thanks for joining me for this live stream. What is it, 3 days after the Belgian Grand Prix, and the Hungarian Grand Prix before that was a double header. Quite a lot to talk about, I think, from that race at the weekend. As wet as it was, and as dominant ultimately as Max's win was, I think there's a lot to talk about from that race. And I've actually got quite a lot teed up on my edit suite here in terms of pictures I'd like to show you and a few other bits and bobs. So I'll do that, but I'll start as we normally start, which is with some of your questions, just to get the ball rolling, and then we will. Then I'll have a look at some of my stuff. If some of your questions and topics are related to what I'm going to be talking about, then I might sort of do my usual thing and go off on a massive tributary somewhere and diversion and do all that stuff. So here we go. First one is from Alessandra Durango. Hello, Alessandra. Hi, Peter. Do you think Charles is finally back? Strong performance in Spa. Is it just a good setup choice or something to do with his mindset? Well, now I'm going to do my clever thing. And before we go any further, I'm going to get this question in here. See if I can do it. I've looked at a million ways of... Oh, it's not working very well. Hang on a sec. What did I not do? I didn't copy that, I think. Let's go back. I looked at a million ways of trying to do this with the lines preset at the right length, and I've eventually discovered the problem is that I'm a Mac guy, and because I'm a Mac guy, OBS, which is the platform I use, don't actually have a software that allows you to do it. The penalty for being a Mac guy. What can you say? It's not a very good color, is it? It looks so good when I was practicing without I was doing a sort of run through. So sorry about all this. I'm going to have to get a different color for this, aren't we? It's not very good. It looked to be a really good color, but of course that was before I had all the lights on. So I'll just do this one as well. Now, after all this palaver, it should all work. Let's have a look. How about that? Let's see how that looks. Yeah, that's not bad. So, getting to the nub of the, I think, if you look at what's been going on, I mean, I've been banging on about how post 2021 it's been a difficult ask for Lewis Hamilton to sort of elbows out going into the first corner alongside Yuki Tsunoda and Alex Albon, rather than dicing with Max at the front of the race. And I think he's done pretty well. I think there's a different thing for Charles, and that has been constant frustration with strategy, constant frustration with the car not being right up there with a Red Bull. And he's at Ferrari, where things are really political anyway, and very difficult to change things and get them moved around. I think Charles pushed very hard to get Freddie Vasseur. I would be surprised if that isn't the case. And I think he's probably feeling that, first 13 races now underway in 2023, things are starting to go a little bit better. It's a cliche in Formula One. It takes a long time to undo the work of the predecessor. But I think in Ferrari's case, it probably does, because it's Ferrari got another problem, unique to Ferrari, really, compared with certainly the British-based teams, and that is it's very difficult to get people to work for Ferrari these days because of Brexit. So assuming you want English, and I think they do. They need English, really good English engineers. It's very difficult to get them to go to work for Ferrari now. And I think there's still a little bit of nervousness in the whole Formula One world about the way Ferrari sacked James Allison. As good as James Allison still is, Ferrari sacked him. There was at the time, of course, he was going through a lot of personal agony with the passing away of his wife. But it was a reality that Ferrari actually did sack him. And I think that's kind of scared a lot of good English, British-based engineers into going there. So that's the first problem. Getting good people to go to Ferrari is not easy. Let's fly around here. I'll do an AJ Foyt and grab it. My peripheral vision. So that's one thing. And I think, yeah, I do think the momentum's starting to go the right way for Charles, and that result would not have hurt him at all. Yeah, it's been a really tough first 13 races, isn't it? When you think about Miami going off twice at the same corner, consecutive days. And I was thinking about this, actually just a couple of days ago. And I think, it's quite an unusual situation in modern Formula One to have a guy that was out there winning races and not that far away from really having a decent look at the championship and looking like, the big star of the future. And then it's all kind of taken away from him. And every race now, it's touch and go whether he's going to have a car that'll get him on the podium. And I think it's, Charles, when you look at it now with the hindsight of the August break already and being able to sit in the sun a bit and just think about things, it's a relatively easy situation for Carlos Sainz, because all he needs to do and wants to do and will do, if he can, is beat Charles Leclerc. That's a very simple goal that he has, and he's been doing quite well with that. He's been driving quite well, finding his own limit and his own rhythm and doing that. For Charles Leclerc, it's a different thing. All he wants to do is go out and beat Max Verstappen, and if he can't beat Max Verstappen, he wants to at least get a pole, knowing that the car's probably not going to be very good on race day. And so he does make a lot of mistakes, and so I'm beginning to sympathize more with him and what happened, say, in Miami than I did at the time, when I thought, how can a guy do that? I'm a guy, I have to confess, I'm a guy that was reared on Nigel Mansell's approach to racing, because we were like brothers for a long time. We're still very good friends, but we were like brothers for a long time. And for those 5 years in Formula One, when he was in uncompetitive cars and not winning, I was very close to him. We probably spoke every day, probably after every session and every race. And I grew up with those 5 years knowing that Nigel would always be absolutely spot on. Yeah, he would make the odd mistake, but he would be spot on in terms of getting the best from the car, and in a very, very professional way, consistent way too. Nobody was watching, nobody took any notice, because it was usually for 13th place or 11th place in the Lotus or whatever it was, or the active ride had collapsed yet again in the Lotus, and it was nowhere. But when he got to Williams, it was a different story. So when Nigel, it was the opposite. Nigel had no winning at all, and then suddenly he was at Williams and things started to gather momentum, and then he was in a very good car, and then he started to win. And when the winning opportunity came, it was easy for him, because it was, the big points weren't the big points anymore. He'd gone through all that, and just having a nice car, it was like, ugh. For Charles, it's the opposite. It's the exact opposite. He came in, first year, where was he? Toro Rosso, was he? Yeah, Sauber. And then, Toro Rosso, Sauber. And then he started winning at Ferrari. And then it's all gone away from him. It's a very difficult thing, that. Very difficult. And I think, in answer to your question, I think things are starting to go in his direction. And, I'll use one of my pictures right now. This is David Sanchez, is the engineer, was the aerodynamicist, who's now going to McLaren, a big Andrea Stella getting all his mates to McLaren now. And that's fair enough. Things are changing. But Ferrari need to get good people now to replace them and to do the job. And that's the biggest problem they face, in my view. So it's not just a question, is Charles now more confident and does he have momentum to get some more results like this? It depends on the car, quite obviously. But, actually going back to Miami, he did have a slight chance of getting the pole in Miami, and there were other races where he's been quick. And let's hope, Ferrari have got... they've done reasonably well, I guess, with the last couple of upgrades. Unlike Aston, for example, who seem to have gone backwards a little bit. McLaren, obviously, have taken the biggest step forwards. So, long answer to a good question. Thank you very much indeed, Alessandra. This is from Mike Bartel. Oscar, okay, I'll put this up. Before I read it out, go back to my routine of how I'd actually do this. So you guys see it as I see it, and that's the reaction. Oops, here we go. So he's saying, he's saying Oscar should have learnt a valuable lesson at Spa. You can't win the race on the first lap, but you sure can lose it on the first lap. Yep, I think, as I said at the time, for me, That was, if you take into in the context of all the penalties that are given for things that happen when two cars are close to one another, whether on the inside or the outside these days. Usually it's the guy on the inside who gets the penalty when somebody tries to pass you on the outside. Lewis Hamilton, good example in the sprint race. I was surprised that there was not more done about that, but I did say, and I think that's what you're angling at, when you see the pincer movement happening in front of you and it is the first corner and you know what can happen at La Source, you back away and you give a Carlos Sainz room, particularly if he's got smoke coming off his inside front. So, I think you can say that. But then equally, if you look at Oscar, he just made a good start and he's keeping to the inside and sort of not doing very much, isn't he? He's just sitting there. Okay, maybe he could have braked a bit earlier. But I suspect he was braking quite early anyway because he was on the mediums. He's on a new set of mediums. And still haven't got to the bottom of that tyre choice. That was one of the most bizarre things. Here I should actually put my hand up and say I didn't give Aston Martin a hard time. Well, I suppose I did, for being out on the medium slicks in part 2 of the shootout on Saturday when everybody else was still on intermediates. And then I said, why even were they mediums? Because it never occurred to me, never even dawned on me, I have to, but this is why I'm putting my hand up, that hadn't been declared a wet qualifying session. I was absolutely staggered that it wasn't. I suppose it's because they could see it was going to clear, and by Q3 it was going to be SQ3, it was going to be dry. So I just, in my mindset, I was just assuming it was wet and you could run whatever dry compound you wanted to, but you couldn't. It was a dry qualifying, even though Q1 was everybody was on intermediates, and Q2 everybody was on intermediates until Aston went out on the slicks. And of course at that point they had to go by the shootout rules, which are medium, soft for the 3 sessions. So that's why I was on the mediums, but even more reason not to put him on the medium slicks, you would have thought. But anyway, there we go. And as just to reiterate that one, of course, as a result of that, Aston didn't get Fernando Alonso into Q3, and for the shootout, for the sprint. And as I said at the time, if you're lucky enough to go out very late in the sort of red flag zone of any session and get away with it and get a time in, you don't push your luck and do it twice. But they did it twice in a row, and it caught them out. But Oscar's a quick learner, and I suppose he'll take that away. It's a bit of a funny first corner, that, relative to a lot of the other first corners in Formula One, isn't it? Because they sort of, it's slightly downhill and they're going into this narrow vortex and everybody's crowding around, and I suppose you could have said to maybe that's why they had him on mediums. Maybe they thought, we don't want him going too late on brakes into La Source, so we'll put him on medium so he's going to leave a bit of room. Maybe that's what it was all about, and it still didn't work, did it? I must talk to Zach about that and see what he says. It's probably, more I think about it, that probably was the reason. They probably wouldn't admit that, but probably was. Okay, here we go. And by the way, speaking of Oscar, I mentioned in a stream recently how good he was in the nets against the Australian cricket team. The likes of Nathan Lyon, and I think Mitch Stark was bowling a few at him. And Mark Webber's confirmed that he is. He's pretty handy with a bat, mate, and a ball. Yeah, good cricketer. Yeah, good stuff. Good cricketer, got to be a good racing driver. A bit like Andrea Stella, if he's watching tennis on his mobile phone at 9 a.m. at breakfast at the Australian Grand Prix, he's got to be cool, isn't he? Victor Rodriguez, hi Peter. People always talk about Lewis, Max, etc., but Fangio couldn't. I think we've had this one before. Fangio couldn't drive flat out. I think easier for Fangio to drive today's car than Lewis. Yeah, we've had that one in the last live stream. Thank you, Victor. I did actually answer that question, and my reply was to say, well, I think Fangio did drive flat out in Formula One and in sports cars. And I did actually say I thought it was at 56. But I don't think it was now. He was in a Maserati, not a Ferrari, when he was quickest in practice for Le Mans, and then decided not to do the race because he didn't really like it. Didn't really like sports car racing. Boring. Good for Fangio. Mega. Right, next one. So we've done that one. What am I looking at here? YouTube. Here we go. Okay, this is the same gentleman, but a very different question now, which looks quite interesting. Not sure I can get my head around it, always swapping that he wants to take place, but let's have a go. be great for Formula One. Yeah, the second. Yeah. This is somebody saying, yeah, we'll get those guys on those Apple computers and we'll make them buy PCs. We'll mess up the way they have to do all this stuff when they're live. I think it would be great for Formula One, says Victor, if once a year, one race a year, the second driver for each team would swap places with the first driver from the other team, from other teams. We would get to see Max versus Hamilton in a Red Bull. The second driver for each team would swap places with the first driver from another team. But how would you define the second driver at Mercedes? Who's the second driver? I suppose it's George, but I mean, a lot of teams don't really have number one and number two anymore. But I get what you're saying. Once a year, and this comes back to my F1 racing thing, doesn't it? In the year 2000, when we had to do this sort of, we all had to write novelettes for that 1st of January 2000 edition, and mine was that in 20 years from now, well, that's now, okay, maybe it's 40 years from now, we have an auction on the Thursday night before every Grand Prix, and the drivers are not contracted to teams at all, and just goes to the bidder, and you can't run the same driver more than, I think I worked out, 4 times a year, and you can't do 2 races in succession with the same driver, and the teams are all bidding for these drivers, and it's a huge television event, and you try and obviously keep your bid, keep the driver that you want for the last race and all the rest of it. It's a bit like that. I mean, we all fantasize about how Max would go in a Mercedes and Lewis would go in a Red Bull, or Charles would go in a Red Bull. And of course, the good guys, Lewis, Charles, would be very, very good in a Red Bull out of the box, but they wouldn't beat Max in a Red Bull, I don't believe, because Max is, he's super confident in a way that we very rarely see in any era of Formula One. He's in complete harmony with his engineering team, led by Adrian Newey. He barely has to speak in order for them to know exactly what he's on about. And he's just, he's stretching the limits of human perfection, I think. He isn't perfection, because no human being, I think, will ever be able to drive the perfect lap, let alone the perfect race. But he's getting nearer to that probably than any other driver in the history of the sport, because he hasn't got any other stuff to clutter his approach. Back if you go back 20 years, there was always a lot more of a danger issue. He's got more races in which to do it now. He's got an incredible engineer, incredible car, and he's making the best of it. That is the thing. So yeah, it would be fun to see all these drivers swapping around. Let me think, what would be the most interesting? It would be interesting to see. Well, I don't know. Charles Leclerc in a Red Bull would be good, wouldn't it? Just to see how good he is, I think would be a nice thing. So anyway, thank you for that. And Victor's saying thank you. Just wanted to say thank you for taking your time and explain to mere mortals the wild world of Formula One. Greetings from Miami. Thank you very much indeed, Victor. Thank you, and I'm sure you'll be at Miami Grand Prix or watching it firsthand. Jacob S says, love these streams. Thanks for doing them. Thank you very much. Eric Findels. Peter, I'd like to thank you. Okay, we'll have a go at this. Put this one up, because I always think it's always nice when some of you actually can see some of the stuff that I ramble on about and talk about, to do with short corners and the difference between the drivers and what they're doing. And I think, there were definite moments, particularly when Max and Checo were together, when you could see the difference. You could see the difference in the corners. This one, after this, I'm going to get on to my first thing that I've kind of prepared. Eric Findays. Hi, Peter. I just wanted to thank you for helping me understand what drivers do when they drive. Watching onboards during Spa and recognizing when some drivers are faster was amazing. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, so there's been, and I've got to thank my friend Diego Moreno for this, because he's drawn my attention to it. Not that I normally get involved in this sort of stuff, but I think it's probably quite a big deal. And that is this guy, Elias Ayab, who is the he's the son-in-law of Carlos Slim, who's one of the wealthiest men in the world, Mexican, and through Checo is one of the sponsors of Red Bull, the team. And after Spa, he did a big TV interview on Fox Latin America, run by my friend Felipe Mago, good guy. And these are some of the things he said. Verstappen can't make such a difference. Such a difference can't be made by only one driver. Max's car has to be much quicker than the other. Now, that's caused, as you would imagine, the Mexican media have got right on the back of that. And they're really, really going for it. And Checo, I'm sure, will, in his own quiet way, be fanning the flames in the background. But of course, none of it's real. But even if it was real, well, even if you wanted to try to understand the point of view, let's put it that way, where and how are they actually messing around with Checo's car and not giving him a proper race car? What are they doing? Well, apparently they say that they think they're giving him old bits, old parts, and the car's overweight, and well, that's it really. I can't think they can think of any more than that. Now, the concept of Red Bull, racers as they are, knowing that Max Verstappen could have a problem at any minute, at any race, because that's the way Formula One is, and that then they want their other car to be winning the race if possible. The concept of Red Bull actually deliberately making Checo's car heavier or fitting old bits that are going to break or something is just so ridiculous that, well, I mean, I've grown up. I mean, I've worked for Formula One, I worked for Ferrari and Williams, and I can tell you now, I mean, because I grew up with Patrick Head, really, I guess, there is absolutely no way in the world you would ever compromise the performance of a car deliberately. You might err on the side of safety when it comes to the gauge of something, where you want a bit stronger, a bit thicker. I'm not talking about. I'm talking about, no, we don't want this car to be too quick, so we're gonna slow it down. Yeah, maybe occasionally in the history of the sport there have been examples of strategy coming into play, and a quick driver is told to come in when he doesn't want to come in, and then the pit stop maybe takes longer than it should. I'm not talking about that either, because there are no real indications of that happening at Red Bull at all. So I'm intrigued to know what Mr. Ayub actually thinks Red Bull are doing to make Checo's car slower than Max's, on the basis that he must think that Checo's as quick as Max. So on the back of all that, bear with me now, on the back of all that, I knew that you've seen, I think, probably the pictures I personally took at Monaco on Saturday, going through Rascasse, and you got quite a good feel there for what various drivers are doing and how different within a team one driver could look from another, or how similar. So then I thought, okay, we've done that. I don't want people to think that I'm in any way trying to fudge this. So I think I'll go through the Red Bull media hub and look for their own photographs to see if there are any on the same corner of their two drivers, taken more or less at the same time, on the same tyres, the same situation, just to see if we can see any differences between Max and Checo. So that's what I did. And this is what I came up with. This is the first one, right? This is, and it's a looping thing, so we can come back. This is the entry, you'll probably recognize, the entry to turn 10 in Bahrain. And these are Red Bull photographs, right? And to get to the position you see Max Verstappen in there, he's been unbelievably good through turn 9, which is a very, very fast kink. He's been just wide of the center of the road, which is where most cars are. He's braking on the edge of the marbles just to get the car nice and square and flat. He's not braking hard, he's just getting the nose down. And then he's getting the car in a position, you can see there, where he can get in nice and early with his nice and early turn in, get a rotation, but he's focused only on getting the diagonal exit on that long straight that leads down to turn 11, because that's the key to this whole area. And that's why it's a great bit of road. And if you look at Checo now, and it's just looping now, you can see there, car number 11, you can see how much further he has gone to the outside of the corner and how much longer he's making the corner, because that's just the way he drives. That's his feel for the corner. He's thinking of a sort of geometric, slightly late apex to the corner, because that's what he loves to do, have a slightly later apex, perhaps even than the geometrical apex, because he's so good on traction, so good at getting the power down, and that's where he's thinking of here. But, that is Max is using less road. He's putting less energy through the tyres going into the corner, so he's going to have better tyre management straight away on the front for sure. And he's going to get a straighter exit sooner than Sergio Perez. And that's just one corner on one circuit. And that's both from the Red Bull Media Hub, and it's pretty clear. But, okay, that's not the only thing. Let's have a look up close now, just to make sure we can see the differences. There's how far Max is. You can see the red dotted line there from the white line as he's going in. Look where Sergio Perez is. He's absolutely on the white line. And what does that begin to tell you and remind you of? That shunt he had first lap out of the pits on the Friday in Hungary when he came out of turn 4. I'll just go back to me now. Came out of turn 4. Had load on the car. The next corner's a right-hander, so he has a load on the car there. He goes back the other way, swings it there, catches the grass and crashes. And that's because that is the way he drives. He always drives on the edge, but he's got load on the car like that. And whereas Max is completely the other way. He's staying he's not deliberately keeping off the white line. It's just, why do I need to be near the white line? I'm getting into the corner to get my transition done. Massive difference in approach. And, I'd be interested to get Mr. Ayoub's opinion of this. He'd probably say, oh, well, that's because Max's car is set up to do that or something. I don't know. Anyway, this is still, and then I went further. Okay, this is still Bahrain. And this is now approaching turn 11. They're at the end of that long straight after turn 10. And again, this is a loop vid. And this is to show, there's two different shots of Checo there. Look where he's turning in, because he wants a really wide entry, long corner. He wants to get the he wants to have a really wide approach to the apex. Then he wants to get on the power. And you can see there, he's riding the curbs, going in. And so that is exactly why he had that shunt in Hungary, because he does that. Look where Max is, absolutely position perfect. Not on the rumble strips at all. And that's a quick approach there going into turn 11. So that's another thing. Less prone to mistakes. And one thing leads to another. You have the crash in Hungary. The mechanics have to spend a lot of time building it. That might set things back in another dimension. You might not be learning something you should have been learning at that point. And so it goes on. So, okay, that's that one. Oh, yeah, but that's Bahrain. Checo's been really good since then. Okay, fine. Okay, let's have a look at Miami now. This is a great thing. I found these in the Miami thing of the Red Bull Media Hub. And this is just a still image of Max Verstappen approaching a right-hander. I don't know how quickly he's going there. I'd have to guess that because it's Miami, it's probably not that quick. I would think he's 90 to 100 miles an hour there, probably. You can see the position of the car anyway. You can see a little bit of the side pod on the right-hand side as you're looking at the picture, between the front and rear wheels. And you can see where the rear wheel is relative to the white line. And you can see it's the third of the red stripes on the curb there. Okay. Now we're going to look at Sergio Perez. It's the third of the curbs. You can't even see the side of the side pod. He hasn't turned anything like as much as Max. So he's turning in there. Even there in Miami, he's turning in considerably later than Max Verstappen. So it's not just Rascasse and Peter Windsor's pictures from the Saturday at Monaco. It's everywhere. Everywhere you can see comparison photographs. Max is turning in earlier and shortening the corners compared with Sergio Perez. Now, I want to make something else very clear. Let's go back to the picture of me. I want to make something else very clear. Because I go on about this, particularly with Max, I'm sure a lot of people out there, probably all the Mexican fans, probably think I'm very anti-Perez. The reason I go on about this is because he is the yardstick, the only yardstick in the world in which we can accurately compare with Max Verstappen, because they're in the same team, they're driving the same cars. So it's pretty logical that you'd always be comparing the two. Now, I'd love to look at some pictures that show how good Perez is with his power application and his traction out of slow corners particularly. But there weren't any from Baku, direct comparison pictures of that. So I couldn't do it. But this is not to be anti-Sergio. This is to show, actually, how good Max Verstappen is. Because Sergio Perez is a pretty seriously good racing driver. And look at how different Max is. I mean, it is just astonishing, really, what he does with the car compared with Perez. Look at that. You can, he's already getting into a much earlier apex. Okay, and then again, lest anybody think, oh well, you still got a fixation about Red Bull. I thought, well, the only other team that'll be organised enough probably to have these sorts of pictures in their media hub will be Ferrari. So I had a look at Ferrari's pictures today. Interesting. I went to Miami to see if I could find that same corner. Nothing there. But look at this. This is Charles Leclerc on the Saturday when he could have got the pole. I think he didn't he lock up going into 17 or something. Then of course he went off at the fast S's there, whatever they are, turn 7 or something. Look at that. He's heading for what Jim Clark would call a false apex. There's no way in the world where he's heading that is the geometrical apex of that corner. Look what Carlos Sainz is doing. He's heading down to the geometric apex. He's making the corner much longer, got a much wider approach. Let's go back to Charles. Look at that. And again, exactly the same position, same tyres, Pirelli Reds, and look at the difference in position of the car on the circuit. So to me, that says it all. So going back to Mr. Ayoub, I think the question is, please advise. Because if he thinks that even despite doing all those differences, has all those differences between Sergio and Max, that Sergio is as good and as quick as Max, and it's got to be the car, then I'd like him to explain how Perez does that. I'd really like to explain how he can be as quick as Max if he's driving like that. I'm not saying it's badly, it's just different. When I say driving like that, I don't mean to insult him. I just mean in that style. So there we are. Thank you very much for that. Now, what am I doing here? Back to Peter Windsor. Okay. Here we are. Next question. Okay. Yeah. Okay, here we go. This is a very good question because this leads back to something else I've been preparing for tonight's show as well. Thank you very much, Morten Fjeld Nielsen. Because you are absolutely teeing up. This is absolutely amazing coincidence. You're teeing up exactly something that I've been looking at. Morten Fjeld Nielsen, thanks for your great vids during Grand Prix weekends, Peter. Porpoising returned to my huge disappointment with Mercedes' upgraded floor. How much of a setback is this? Will the floor have to be, do you think? Well, it wasn't only Mercedes. Porpoising did return at Spa for quite a lot of teams because it's a quick circuit and because we're not through all that. And yeah, Mercedes certainly had problems with it. For me, it was fascinating. There's something here. I don't know if this has been. Well, first of all, let's just have a look at this. This is the two rear wings Mercedes had. As you can see, George has got a bigger rear wing, had more downforce at the rear. And in the video today, posted today on YouTube by Mercedes, Mike Elliott, the chief technical officer, does a few questions and answers. And in them, he's asked about the porpoising. And he finishes by saying, oddly, I thought, he said, yeah, we had porpoising and we weren't the only team, but hopefully it was just a circuit specific or a setup thing. And I was thinking, well, if it's a setup thing, it's a bit of a worry, isn't it? Because, it shouldn't happen. And of course, the excuse is up and down the pit lane, not necessarily at Mercedes, just, no dry running, we couldn't really get the car set up correctly. And that wing choice that George Russell made was actually made as a result of sim testing before they got to Spa, which again is amazing to me that they would be that confident that the sim can simulate everything they're going to feel at Spa to the point where they can actually, knowing it's going to be a wet weekend, lock themselves into a rear wing spec like that. I found that astonishing, really. But anyway, they did. What I wanted to talk about, and it is relevant to all of this, is look at these. These were the maximum speeds in qualifying for the Grand Prix proper, not doing the shootout here, in qualifying. Now, the speed trap in Spa, interestingly, was 30 meters after the exit of Radillon, turn 4, the left-hander at the top of the hill, top of Eau Rouge, long before they got to terminal velocity. Just basically the speed the cars are coming out of Eau Rouge. And so that's, Lewis Hamilton quickest. So let's have a look at what that means. Lewis Hamilton, 3:13. Max Verstappen, 3:07. Interesting. Out of Eau Rouge. Can that be right? And I was looking at that and I'm thinking, what do all these numbers mean? They can't be real. There must be errors. Carlos Sainz is second. Fernando Alonso, he can live with that. He'd be third for sure. Charles up there. Max, 3:07. And, so it goes on. I was just thinking, what is that all about? So then I waited with great interest in the race maximum speeds to see what would happen in the race. And look at the race. Same place. We're talking 30 meters after the exit of Eau Rouge. Quickest, Logan Sargent, 3:23. This is long before DRS. Albon, 3:20. Zhou, 3:20. Verstappen, 3:09, right at the bottom of the list. And I couldn't work it out. And I'm not saying I've got it absolutely worked out now. This is putting the two together now. So you can actually look at it yourselves. I mean, the drivers are in a completely different order, and the orders look completely skewed anyway. But if you wanted to have a pattern there, you could say Max hasn't actually changed anything. He's gone as quick in qualifying as he has in the race, whereas a lot of the other quick drivers have all gone relatively slowly in the race, and the guys who are quite slow in qualifying have actually gone very quickly in the race. That's kind of what it looks like there, literally down to halfway down. And so what does that mean? I'll tell you what I think it now means, and I'll come back. And this is where it comes back to porpoising. I think what we see there is a delineation, literally halfway down the list of drivers there, between the teams that have got pretty aggressive and very good floors and downforce working, and the teams that don't. And the teams that are really aggressive with their aerodynamics, that is, only can get that grunt, aerodynamic downforce, if they run unbelievably low. And that is, they run literally 1 millimeter change is a massive change in the amount of downforce you get from the car. And I don't think the other teams, the lesser teams, have anything like such aggressive downforce, and therefore their ride heights are nothing like as critical. And whereas, and I think Red Bull went into that race, for example, if you go back to those times, those speeds, I think Red Bull went back into that race saying, if we do anything through Eau Rouge remotely quick, we're just going to lose the floor straight away. So we're going to have to be really careful through there. And I think that's what that is. And that's, it's 3:09. It's basically what they were doing. And Max went even slower than that. I mean, he was really slow in the race through S1, Sector 1 and Sector 3, as I said in the race report at the time. And he made it all up in Sector 2, where it wasn't so critical to have to worry about floor damage, providing you stayed away from the curbs. And I think that's what that is. I think that is actually in itself, it tells you which teams have got the downforce kind of working and which teams haven't. And, you could argue that if Max is only doing 3:09 in qualifying there, where is he? 3:07, and Lewis is doing 3:13, no wonder Mercedes had a bit of porpoising. Because look what Red Bull were doing through there because of that problem. And maybe it worked for one lap. And then they ground the floor away. And I think that's what happens with Mercedes going back. As another thought, I think as a general trend recently, we've seen Mercedes not very good on full tanks. People say, oh, well, single lap, they were compared with the race distance. But I compare the race distance and I break it down to full tanks compared with the back half of the race. And Mercedes generally are better in the back half of the race, as far as I can see. And that can only be because with the extra weight in the car, their floor is right on the edge of what they can do with it. And they probably, therefore, have to run it a little bit higher, or they have to go a bit slower, or whatever they have to do to get around that, which is a real indication that they're still struggling to have any sort of consistency with that car. When they talk about the small operating window, that's basically what they're on about. Whereas Red Bull kind of know what they're doing, don't they? They're sort of one step ahead of the game all the time. Spa, Eau Rouge, yeah, watch the floor. We won't be quick through Sector 1. Don't worry, we'll get it all set up for Sector 2. And it worked perfectly. You know, there's a team totally on the case to me. And getting it absolutely right. So thank you for that one. That kind of played in really nicely to what I wanted to say about those times, because it took me a long time to understand. Well, I'm not sure I've got it 100%. I can't say that is definitely what's going on, but I can't imagine it's anything else. What else would it be? You know, if Logan Sargent, nothing against Logan, I think he's quite good, but I think if Logan Sargent is the quickest driver of all out of Eau Rouge, then it's got to be something to do with setup of the cars and the quick teams not going quickly there because they're running so low. I don't imagine it can be anything else. And so thanks to the FIA, I would say, for putting that speed trap where it was, because that's given us that glimpse that we never normally get, because normally the trap is, you know, somewhere near the end of the DRS zone. They had another one, and we can look at the end of Sector 1 speeds, and they're up in the 355s and stuff. But they're all a bit meaningless, those, because you have to be in the DRS to be in the top 10, and sometimes you might be on your own and doing nothing. Interestingly, Perez wasn't very quick, even though he had that really nice pass over Leclerc on the first lap. You can imagine he would have been quite quick then. There was no DRS then, of course. So there we are. Quite good, all this flicking in and out of pictures, I think. I'm quite enjoying this. Famous last words, something's bound to go wrong any minute. Next question. You know what's going to happen, don't you? Everyone's going to get annoyed because I'm not going to get through anything like this, all the questions. But don't worry, it's the August break. You can always ask questions again, come back. I'll be doing some more live streams. Hi Peter, George used to pull out wonders with Williams on Saturdays, but why can't he recreate that form with a much better, faster Mercedes? Well, interesting. I mean, let's talk about that, because again, Mike Elliott was asked what was that mess in qualifying all about in the shootout. Was it the shootout? Yeah. When, you know, Lewis was about to start his quick lap, or he would come out of La Source, and there's George, and George leads him up the hill and the lap's gone. And Lewis was not impressed. And, you know, I talked about that quite a lot in the video, and I made the point, you know, Toto's guy, because Lewis always wanted to keep Valtteri, didn't he? And I would say, I mean, just to finish that point, Mike Elliott was saying, of course, everybody wants to be out right at the end, and they all know that's the quickest time to be out, and you've got to be out then. Not remembering, of course, that some teams like Alpine are quite good at going out in the middle of the session, actually getting the time in that enables them to go to the next stage. They've done that quite well recently. And okay, but getting back to the point, oh yeah, but both our drivers wanted to be out right at the end because that's when the track's at its quickest. Well, that's because you got George Russell in there alongside Lewis Hamilton. I'm not saying that if Valtteri was still in that team, that he wouldn't have wanted to been out right at the end as well, when it was really, really, when the track was at its quickest. But what I am saying is that if Valtteri was still in the team, Lewis might have said to him, unbelievable traffic jam, for sure there's going to be an unbelievable traffic jam in the last 5 minutes, let's just make sure that we stay away from one another at least. Or Toto might have said, Valtteri, get the banker lap in, go out, you know, 4 minutes before Lewis, please. And that's probably what would have happened, actually. But because it's George, you know, George, super quick George, he's got to be treated the same way as Lewis. And that is exactly the point that I've been making, the nub of the point I've been making ever since they took the decision to sign George, because he's not, that's where he's not Valtteri. Yeah, he's probably quicker as well, although Valtteri, you know, Hungary wasn't slow, was he? And he's right on the edge, and he's got a lot of other stuff going for him as well. But in terms of cramping Lewis's style, as I've said it many times already, that is exactly what I mean. It's you know, it's a driver that you can't say to George, go out early please, we want to leave the track for Lewis. You can't say that to George Russell because he's George Russell. And that's it. Yeah, if you want George, you're going to have those issues. And as I keep saying, if Mercedes have a race-winning, championship-winning car in 2024, watch out for the fur flying between those two, because it's going to be an issue. I'm just looking down at any of the other stuff that Mike Elliott said of interest. No, that was it really. Yeah, I mean, he said a lot along the lines of, we didn't get any dry running, so we didn't get the setup quite right, and that's probably why we weren't very good in the race, because we didn't get the tyres right and tyre deg. But then, the response to that, of course, it wasn't in the video because this is a Mercedes video, but the response was, well, other teams are in the same situation. So anyway, but it's good of Mercedes that they put that out. At least they make the effort to do that, and good to see it. So there we are. Have I answered the question there? I think George is, he's still very quick. I mean, the problem is when the car's not a great racing car and you're faffing around trying bits or not trying bits, and your rear wing's maybe not what you want, or you got to, because you've gone for the rear wing. And Mike Elliott made the point that George went for that bigger rear wing because he felt it gave him more room to maneuver with the setup. So if that's the case, he's got to justify it and start manoeuvring with the setup, I suppose, even though they were in Parc Fermé at the time, but front wing or whatever, front flap. So, yeah. Complicated mess, I would call it. There we go. M.A. Khan, one of our regulars. Nice to have you back. Okay, here we go. Where are we? What am I doing here? So I've completely lost. Oh, yeah, that's what I'm doing. Going here, aren't I? Here we go. Sorry, all I'm doing is this line chopping business when I try to get the thing to fit, because I'm an Apple Mac guy. MA can move it slightly to the right, I think. Just give it a little bit more breathing space. There we go. Hi Peter. Mark Hughes, good man, has done a piece on Oscar and Max in relation to Sector 2 at Spa, echoing what you've been saying. Apparently McLaren have been comparing his technique uniquely to that of Max. Oh, well, there you go. Yeah, I mean, he is a short corner driver. Absolutely no doubt about that. And I did go through the McLaren Media Hub, and lots and lots of pictures of Lando and Oscar out of the car doing their thing. Very few photographs of the cars in exactly the same angle at entries to corners where you can actually see any differences. But we will see them. And, I keep saying it. It's not going to be an easy ride for Lando Norris, because this guy is a very, very good short corner driver, and Lando's a very, very good, I wouldn't say long corner driver, but he's definitely not short. And I first made that point, about 3 years, 2020, I think, when he was on track in Austria with Lewis with an overhead, and you could see, on track they were together, and you could see the differences there, that Lando was taking longer corner entries to Lewis, and he hasn't actually developed. For me, that's a slightly worrying thing about Lando, that he hasn't actually developed in that area. He's really good in so many ways, so soft and supple in the way he drives, and his rates of input are brilliant. Everything's good, but his corners are quite long, and that's a good short corner driver is always going to beat a good medium length corner driver over a period of time, and that's the problem Lando faces. And I'm not sure any more than Perez understands the difference between him and Max. I don't believe Lando probably, if he did think that was the case, he'd probably think it wasn't important, because he's always been driving the way he drives, and he's been winning races and been successful. So why would he want to change now at this stage of his career? So that's probably how he thinks. But twice now, with Oscar going well in Q1 or Q2, Lando's gone off and affected a qualifying session as a result of the pressure being applied by Oscar Piastri. Not verbally, obviously, because he's a very quiet, relaxed guy, isn't he? It's all just, look at his sector times, and he was superb through Sector 2, just as Max was. Those two, and Charles too. I thought Charles was really good in Sector 2 in general over the weekend at Spa. Although, of course, in qualifying, it was turn 9 where he just went too quickly. This is a typical, this is the Charles of today. You know, he could have been on the pole, I think, at Spa. He was right there, and then that stupid downhill left-hander where I say stupid, it's a boring corner where Stroll crashed. He just went in too quickly, which is dare I say, a silly thing to do, because it's a very, very annoying corner where it's very difficult to be quick, really, to do anything different to anybody else other than maybe come out of the previous corner, middle of the road, and get yourself nice transition for 9. But he just ran wide and lost, I don't know, a couple of tenths through there. But it was a good lap otherwise. And but generally in the race he was really good, I thought, through sector 2. But thank you, it's good to know. And if Mark Hughes is agreeing with me, I'm flattered, because Mark's top man. I was a big fan of his brother Warren Hughes, who should have done a lot more than he did. He was very good at Formula 3 level, and I spent a Macau Grand Prix weekend once working with Alan Docking, and we associated with Docking, finding sponsorship for him, and Warren was the driver, and he was just sensational, really good. Such a shame drivers like that don't, make it further. Okay. There's another question from M.A. Khan, and don't no problem with that. Don't be shy in asking 2 questions. I'm only nervous about getting through them all, which I know I'm not going to. Here we go. I'm just going to get this. What's all this? Does Schumacher have an undeserved reputation, far worse than anything he did? Russell against Lewis in Spain could have resulted in a fatality. Surprising Lewis didn't call for a ban. I would have. Yeah, that was, dare I say it, you're going to have George Russell, you're going to have some fireworks. I mean, what about George with Bottas and Imola? 2020, was it? That was pretty serious shunt as well, wasn't it? I don't know to answer your question though, M.A. Khan, because I don't know what you perceive or others perceive to be, I think you're talking about Michael, right? Michael's reputation. I mean, for me, he was one of the all-time great drivers, and had his shortcomings, but so did Ayrton Senna. I was going to say I'm not going to say so did Jim Clark, because I don't think he had any shortcomings, but so did Ayrton Senna in terms of shortcomings. Michael did. And but he was really good. He was so good in so many areas. So I'm assuming you think he hasn't got a very good reputation, but the Michael I know has got I think he's brilliant. So I don't know what other people think about him. I don't really spend a lot of time worrying about. It's only when Diego Marino sends me WhatsApps telling me what Elias Ayubas said about Perez having a duff car that I get remotely interested. But I don't know what other people think about Michael's. What I do know is that when Michael was winning his championships on Bridgestones, sort of early 2000s, I was working for Speed TV at the time. Very good team we had then. And given that the Formula One ratings in general were not great in America, for obvious reasons, there weren't many races, and it wasn't exactly the sport of choice. And given that it was a relatively straightforward championship that Michael was winning everywhere, we actually had surprisingly good ratings compared with sort of midweek Sky TV Formula One stuff. And I think that's because we took the trouble to explain to viewers what Michael was doing and how he was winning all these races and why he was winning all these races, rather than just sort of blandly saying, oh, well, this is boring. Well, I think, with David Hobbs, Bob Varsha, Steve Matchett, I think we got to the nub of what it was all about. And those were very, very, very fond memories of those years, with Michael winning all those races and championships. Right, another one. Sami Chadina. Okay, 1 second. Back to here. Let's get this going. It's not the end of the world having to do this, is it? It just takes a little bit of time. It gives me time to chill a bit. Right, Sami. Hi, Peter. Amazing content. Thank you very much. I saw something about Schumacher being forced to retire by Montezemolo. Any insights? And what do you think about Mick's driving style? Should he get another shot? No, I don't think he was forced to retire at all. I think, as far as I know, he was on the edge of yes or no, but he realised, a bit like Carlos Reutemann leaving Ferrari, knowing that Gilles would be there alongside Jody, and that if he stayed at Ferrari, Gilles was going to be out of a drive. I think it was the same thing with Michael. He was very fond of Felipe Massa, and he knew that if he retired... Here's Dexter. How are you? How you doing? He knew that if he retired then, Felipe would be out of a drive. So, out of a Ferrari drive anyway. So that sort of pushed him over the edge of making that decision. And it was that. I think it was more Felipe. And I think Felipe knows that as well. I think he's mentioned that a couple of times. Yeah, he has. Mick, yeah, I think Mick's good. I think Mick is good. Very, it was a bit of a fraught Formula 3 career he had, and Formula 2 he did very well. Both of those, Formula 3 and Formula 2, back end he was really good. Took a long time to sort of get everything centered and right. But when he did get it right, he was very good under pressure too. The only thing I'd say about Mick, which applies to a lot of drivers, I think, is that I think he's a bit spiky with his driving and his inputs. He might be learning a little bit from Lewis now, on looking at some of his traces or whatever. Although it's very difficult to see the differences between Lewis and George on traces at Mercedes, I would imagine. Very difficult. Again, the stuff that we talk about is between the digits. and I think Mick, I'm amazed that Mick hasn't actually picked up the phone and done half a dozen days with Rob Wilson, purely because he must know that Lance Stroll and quite a lot of others do stuff with Rob, so why wouldn't Mick want to do that? And that's a bit disappointing, I think, because I think a guy with his talent could benefit a lot, and he's got the time right now. Let's face it. I mean, why wouldn't he do that? So I think that's a bit disappointing. But if he did that, I think that would give him a nice rounding to his style. But I think he, in any good Formula One team, he's quite capable of finishing on the podium and in the right situation, winning races. But he would need to take that next step, I think, would be my take. Good guy, though. Very nice guy. Good man. Got a lot of time for him as a person. Okay, another one. Thanks for that question, Sammy. Here we go. Here we go. Hi, Peter. Enjoy your content. But how does Lewis maintain his composure, especially during dices with George? Is it because he realizes his position, the position he is in terms of lack of leeway he's been given? It's a good question, and I did touch on this on the sprint video on the Saturday night. How Lewis did keep his composure, and he kept his composure in Abu Dhabi 21, didn't he? I can think of many drivers that wouldn't have been anything like as elegant and as dignified as Lewis was. And I don't know. Every time you see pictures of Lewis wearing his kit out of the car and doing some stuff, and you think, oh, wow, this mega star. But then he does something at a race meeting, and he says something, and you think, wow, this guy's very mature, and he's very emotionally intelligent. And I think that is what I'm thinking of is, during the anthems and stuff, he's got the headset in and you see him sort of moving and you think, oh, come on, Lewis, stand to attention, please. But then he does something and you think, wow, that is very profound in the way he's holding back his emotions, and he's doing it for the right reason. And I'm sure there'll be some cynics out there who say, well, if you were being paid that much by Mercedes, you'd keep your mouth shut as well. I'm sure there are people saying that. But it's, he's big enough to say whatever he wants to say, and people will listen. And I think we've seen, ever since Abu Dhabi 21, I'm amazed at at his self-control, and as you say, he's been very composed in quite difficult situations. So for me, Lewis has always been a guy you can learn from. I've said this before. Every time I talk to him, I learn something either about life or people or racing or driving or whatever it is. I learn about it. I learn from Lewis, and he's a very bright guy. I think that's what it is. He's quite intelligent, isn't he? So, he knows that he's lost the battle over George, and he's got George now, so make the most of that. And there's going to be some dramas. And that was exactly what happened at Spa. If that had been Valtteri, that wouldn't have happened. I think it was basically what his body language was saying. But what can I do? And I'll just do the best job I can. He knows that going to Ferrari would be complete chaos, so what's the point? For the reasons I mentioned earlier, Ferrari can't seem to be able to hire anybody good anymore. Nobody seems to want to work for Ferrari at the top technical level. And I'm not saying that to disparage Ferrari or anything else. I'm basically saying it's because of Brexit and how difficult it is in Italy, and a little bit of the James Allison thing. How difficult it is getting work situations for English people in Italy now and all that stuff. And I think Lewis knows that he's never going to be in a Red Bull, so as long as Max is there, so he might as well just try and enjoy his life as much as possible. And I think that's what he's doing. And I think we all know that, if you can keep your pulse rate pretty low and relaxed, regardless of what happens, you're going to enjoy life a bit more. I mean, learning from Lewis about pulse rates and pressure as well. Speaking of which, now who was it this time? I think I mentioned it, didn't I? Oh, it was Iwasa, wasn't it? Unbelievably high pulse rate when he was lying 10th in the Formula 2 race, like 175 or something ridiculous. What is wrong with these people? That was from Rao. Thank you very much, Rao. So here's another one. Hi, Peter. Recently watched old footage of Pedro Rodriguez beating Eamon Rint Nix at Spa. That sounds like this is a good one. This is a question right up my street. Hi, this is Karma in Babylon. Hi, Peter. Recently watched old footage of Pedro beating Eamon Rint X70 Old Spa. If Max had missed out on Q3, Checo might have had a small chance. How good was X? Oh, lots going on there. That 1970 Belgian Grand Prix was the last Grand Prix, Formula One Grand Prix held on the long circuit at Spa. So that was an historic race in that sense. It was unbelievably quick round the back, Master King. Chris Amon really should have won that race. He was in the March, and he'd won the Daily Express Trophy at Silverstone. He was really quick. He was due for a win, finally. And Pedro was in the old BRM, which 3-litre formula. Chris always said, the 3.1-litre BRM. Anyway, and it was blowing out smoke and oil, as they always do, those V12 BRMs. And Chris was just waiting there, basically, to, for the thing to blow up. Of course, 2 laps from the end, he realised, 2 long laps from the end, it was a long lap in those days, he realised that it probably wasn't going to blow up. So he went flat through the Master Kink in a March 701, which is the nearest thing to torture that I can possibly imagine, and finished right behind him, But in a way, so pleased that Pedro won that Grand Prix. It was a great Grand Prix win for Pedro. Fabulous racing driver. My WhatsApp, actually, is a picture of Pedro. Just the Bell Star on the helmet. I was a huge Pedro Rodriguez fan. Wonderful driver. And he won that race at Spa, so there you go. If Max had missed out on Q3, Checo might have had a small chance. Yeah, well, it would have taken more than that, I think, really, because of what Max was doing in Sector 2. I mean, going back to the Max, Checo, Elias, Ayub situation, remember this. If Checo's car was so bad, why was he quicker often than Max through Sectors 1 and 3 at Spa? You can't do that if you've got a terrible car and it's overweight or whatever it is that they think it is. Why was he so quick there? Which he was. It's just that when they got to Sector 2, quite often, Max was a second a lap quicker than Perez through Sector 2. Pouin, all the really difficult bits. So, yeah. How good was X? Oh, X was really good. It's good to see him there on the grid. Good man. I did a long interview with Ix. If you haven't seen it on this channel, it's on this channel. It was like an hour and a half, I think, when the new book that has just come out. I counsel you to buy that wonderful book on Jackie Ix. It's about this thick, and it's incredible. Can you see? Oh, sorry, this thick. Incredible photographs and just a wonderful, wonderful tome to have in your bookshelf. And Jackie was incredibly good, unbelievably good. 66. He's in Formula 2 Matra, the German Grand Prix, and he's already up there with the F1 guys, qualifying a sort of third row. 67, because the Formula 2 cars had to start, behind the Formula 1 cars. 67, he would have been on the front row, I think, or the second row, in a Formula 2 Matra around the long circuit of the Nürburgring. Fabulous driver. He should have won a lot more Grand Prix. Just good in the wet, good in the dry, brilliant around Spa. 65, a Mirage in the wet at Spa. He was unbelievable. It was a Ford GT40 sort of lookalike thing, and unbelievable. Sorry, was it 65? Was it maybe 60, maybe 67? But really good. 68 actually. Sorry, 68. Unbelievably good. So yeah, huge fan of Jackie Ix. Lovely guy too, and got a great collection of cars. And he did all that Paris-Dakar stuff, and he was good at that. And he's got a very good feel for life and values, and I think he feels now, because I think he was quite remote as a driver when he was at his peak. I know he's one of the few guys Jim Clark ever got annoyed with after that 68 Formula 2 race in Barcelona, when Jackie T-boned Jimmy at the hairpin first lap and took Jimmy out. And Jimmy was one of the few times he was really quite angry with Jackie Ix. And then I was talking to Brian Redman not so long ago, and he was saying, Jackie and he got on very well, but they never really bosom buddies. They weren't that close. But relatively recently, Jackie's been phoning more and saying how much he appreciated those times with Brian, and he's a much more well-rounded person now. Lovely guy now. So he was good. I mean, he was as good as, what's the comparison? I mean, he was certainly world championship material. I never won the championship, but I mean, he was quite capable of winning. 69 German Grand Prix in that Brabham is unbelievable. So yeah, no, he was one of the best. And his father, of course, was Jacques Ix, very good journalist. Matthew Gibbons. So there's another one here. Let's have a look. Let's see what this is all about. I haven't done that one very well. Actually, I'll tell you why I haven't done that one very well, because I was going to add something else about all that, which, talking about Chris Amon, actually. I'll do that just after I finish this. Yeah, I'll get onto this in a second. Just talking about Chris Amon. 60. Here's just a little snippet from the past. But they're all racing drivers, and they're all doing their own thing at that time, and everything was in colour and everything was real. 65 Martini Trophy Silverstone was a Group 7 race, which was big Can-Am type sports cars. And Chris was doing quite a lot of testing for McLaren at that point, and McLaren had this beautiful car, the McLaren M1 A, B and C, which was their first Can-Am car. Very nice car. And what I'd like to say I'd forgotten, but I don't think I ever knew, that Chris was driving an automatic transmission version of that car quite early in the year. Alton Park, Bruce raced it as well. They were testing automatic transmission in that McLaren Can-Am car. And by the way, if you haven't seen the Nichols road car, which has just been launched, have a look at it. It is unbelievable. It's Steve Nichols, who of course was the chief designer of the McLaren MP44, who's done a road car with a carbon chassis, but it's basically a rendition of that McLaren M1 Can-Am car. It's absolutely superb. Anyway, getting back to the point, they get to this race at Silverstone, on the Grand Prix circuit at Silverstone, before the chicanes and everything, really quick circuit. And Bruce is out there on Friday in the Can-Am McLaren M1B, I think it was at that stage, and he's accelerating out of Copse, And as he does so, a fuel union breaks going into the fuel injection. And fuel sprays everywhere down the back of the cockpit. And Bruce is wearing no gloves and a nylon jacket over his race suit. Sort of, not STP, I don't know what it was. It was a nylon jacket. Maybe it was a little bit wet. And could feel this intense heat from the fire that was building up at the back, doing about 80 miles an hour, and then pulled off to the outside of Beckett's on the grass, jumped out, and was treated with second and third degree burns as a result, and said afterwards, from now on I'm always going to wear gloves and I'm always never going to wear a nylon jacket, because it was the nylon that had burnt into the skin. And not even, it wasn't even flame-proof gloves. Just if it had leather gloves, it would have been better than nothing. So he didn't race, and so they put Chris Amon in the car. But because he didn't practice, he did one lap or something. So he started from the back of the grid. John Surtees was on the pole in the Lola T70, and Chris, after 3 laps, was up with Surtees and won the race. Unbelievable. And Trevor Taylor, meanwhile, had a similar thing to Bruce coming out of Cops. Different reason, but this Lotus 30 that he was driving caught fire. But Trevor was going much quicker than Bruce. Well over 100 miles an hour, maybe 95, 100 miles an hour. And he figured that there was no chance of survival if he stayed in that car. And he just jumped out of the Lotus 30, and the car just careered on into the earth bank at Beckett's, and he tumbled down the road, got a few bruises and cuts, but he was okay, and the thing was in flames. And then there's a punchline to all this. Chris Amon wins the race, and on the Monday he's testing that car at Brands Hatch, and on his own they're tyre testing for Firestone, and he comes out of South Bank leading onto the back straight at Brands, and the car, something breaks at the front, and the car suddenly turns sharp right. And Chris can see that it's going to be a big shunt. And so no seatbelts. And so he ducks down under the dash of the car and lets the car sort of implode, explode, and bits flying off it all down the main straight. And gets out of the wreckage, and he's got one injury on his chin. And guess what it was? It was from the dash. He cut himself underneath the dash, on the edge of the dashboard of the car. They were the days. People think, they like to compare eras and racing drivers of today and the records of today and how they compare with the past. I mean, think of what it was like being a racing driver. This is 1965. Anyway, I thought you'd enjoy that one. And of course, the final, because it was the Martini Trophy, all the headlines were dry martini for Chris Amon, all that stuff. So Chris he won Formula 2 races, he won big sports car races, of course he won Le Mans. He was pretty good, very good. Matthew Gibbons, hi Peter. Despite disappointment in Belgium, Piastri seems to be fairly consistently beating Norris since McLaren applied their significant upgrades. Do you think this will continue? I'm afraid I do. Yeah, I do, because I've said, he's a shorter corner driver than Lando, and I've been saying that about Lando, that his corners are quite long relative to, say, Lewis or Leclerc and certainly Max. I've been saying that for 3 years now, and along comes Piastri, who's naturally got a feel for short corner, just lovely touch. He can get the car rotated. He doesn't have to suffer from understeer in doing all that, and he's got a great feel. And from what we can gather, he actually has a very good eye for learning and what's going on and looking at what Max is doing. And there's nothing wrong with that, of course. I think I've got a lot of respect for him if he is doing that, because in motor racing in general and Formula One in particular, it's not fashionable to be looking at what the other teams do and what the other drivers do. We don't need that. We can do our own thing. We're brilliant. All we need is a great car. But here's Oscar being humble enough to know that he can learn from a guy like Max. And here's another point I'd like to make under the whole heading of the Max Perez Elias Ayub drama, and that is that there's nothing wrong in saying how good Max is right now, because it's a very unusual situation for a Grand Prix driver as good as Max to find himself in a team as good as Red Bull at a time when he has absolutely no worries about anything. I've made this point earlier in the video, but because of that, he's actually delving deeper, I think, into what a very good racing driver can actually do with a racing car. And if Oscar Piastri's twigged that and he's watching what Max is doing, then all power to him. I can't imagine Lando is thinking that way. I'm sure Lando's thinking, oh, Max is unbeatable in his usual funny, friendly way. Oh, Max in that Red Bull, we should stay at home. But does he spend a lot of time actually analysing, just learning from Max in a situation that's a very rare situation where a driver has got so much stuff with which he can play and he's good anyway, and to watch what Max does with that is fascinating. I think it's fascinating to see how he won that Belgian Grand Prix by being super slow, if you like, relative to Perez in sectors 1 and 3 and mega quick in sector 2. I mean, that's pretty brilliant stuff, really. Next question, what are they going to do at Monza? It's not just a question of, they'll be quick everywhere. I think they'll be focusing on certain things and certain ways of doing it. And are there places where you can be a good short corner driver will do a longer corner driver at Monza? Absolutely. First chicane for sure. The way the extra steering lock that Max will be getting in the car, coming out of the first chicane and that long run through Curva Grande into the second chicane. Coming out of the second chicane, the way you get the power down, the car isn't always pointed in a straight line, and you got to make sure that you don't overload the car too much as you're coming out. The Lesmos, for sure, there's going to be ways that Max is going to find a rotation zone there and the exit that he wants out of the second Lesmo into the Ascari section. There's a long fast left, long fast right, and then you got the exit there, and you watch for Max. I don't know if the cameras will be on it. They should be, keeping the car absolutely as close as possible to the white line on acceleration out of Ascari for as long as he can comfortably do it before he moves the car over to the left for the Parabolica. He won't be just coming out and just going to the left unless he's in the race and somebody's in front of him doing that. Obviously it's different, but if he's on his own, he's going to be keeping the car absolutely straight while he's accelerating and then moving it when it's near terminal velocity. Because it's always better, if you're going to have to move the car, put G-load through it, always better to do it at terminal velocity when you're accelerating. All those little details. And then the Parabolica, which is to some extent Red Bull's corner. They always have a good car for the Parabolica. But it's, how quick do you want to be going in, because it's all about the exit. And it's a very inviting entry, the Parabolica. And be interested to see how Max is there. Interesting to see where the speed trap. I hope they have a speed trap on the exit of the Parabolica. That'd be good. That'd be excellent. So yeah, I do think. I mean, all credit to McLaren. Just a good point about the upgrades. The upgrades they've made. We do a lot. I've done a lot with Shub, and we'll continue to do stuff with Shub and Scarbs about all the details, those little cutting things they have on the front wings and all the edges and stuff, and all the floor edges. But the reality of it all is, it's the actual underside of the floor that is the key to all that's going on in Formula One at the moment, and we don't get to see that very much. And I think we can look at all these other little details, but ultimately, what McLaren have done to that floor is something Aston Martin probably would like to know. It kind of looks as if the last couple of upgrades on the Aston haven't gone in the right direction, whereas they have on the McLaren. I don't think it's because of the upgrades that suddenly Oscar's nearer Lando. I think Oscar's getting a bit more confidence. He's got confidence in his own ability now. And even if McLaren go right off the boil now, I think you'll see Oscar still being very, very good relative to Lando. So let's go back to... I'm a big Lando fan, though. I love the way he drives. I mean, he's a bit Jochen Rintish, I think. Here we go. Harshal Palmer. Hi, Peter. Looks like Oscar made the right choice not to drive for Alpine. The leadership at that team is not as serious about Formula One. Yeah, I don't think any of us, me included, ever disputed the choice between McLaren and Alpine. If at that stage of the winter there was an option to drive for either team, obviously you'd go for McLaren. I can't imagine anybody would have chosen Alpine over McLaren. All I ever said was, I think the way it was handled, the departure from Alpine after Alpine had announced him as their racing driver, I think that could have been handled very differently, and I just think it was a bad thing in the context of all the young racing drivers out there that we'll never get to see in Formula One. And here was a young guy suddenly walking out of a team that's just announced him as their driver. And I thought that, but in terms of, and that's gone now, that's over. It was what it was. Alpine obviously let him slip through their fingers, and Mark Webber running Oscar did a very good job of making sure he got Oscar into a McLaren, and that was it. And now, obviously it's the better team. But as I say, I think anybody with racing blood in their veins would have, at any point, said, do you think a young guy would be better off at McLaren or Alpine? I think we all would have said McLaren. There's no doubt about that. And so in a way, it's no surprise. But for me, it's quite surprising that they've got rid of Otmar, because he hasn't been there very long. As I said before, for me, he's always been quite well integrated with BWT, and I would have thought that that would have been a factor, but it's obviously not. And the new regime apparently said that he was going to stay on as team principal, and then 2 weeks later changed their mind. So as you say, it looks pretty, I don't know if not serious is the right way to describe it, but it looks very complicated and messy, doesn't it? And Mattia Binotto looks like he's going to go there as technical director or whatever, so that'll be an interesting thing as well. I don't know what to say about it, really. It's kind of sad, because Renault, the history of Renault was always a very nice, the Renault when they first came into Formula One, lovely team. They've always been pretty cool, haven't they? Even in the Flavio era they did pretty good stuff, but they seem to be very messy now. And when Alan Permain is no longer part of Benetton stroke Renault stroke whatever it is now, then it really is the end of an era. And as I said before, I've got enormous respect for Alan and for Otmar, and I think for those two guys to have been released is very worrying indeed. Here we go. That's an interesting one. Why do I keep calling this a 19B? Because it is a 19B, isn't it? I thought it was. Because it's basically the development of last year's car. That's how I see it anyway. So that's why I call it a 19B. Also, what is the same way you call Williams FW07B the following year, and a C the year after that, like Lotus 49, A, B, C, D. Makes sense. I suppose if you haven't followed Formula One as long as I have, maybe it sounds a bit odd, but that's why I call it a B. What is Lando doing to consistently beat Oscar? Despite his long corners, leadership at that team are not serious about. Oh, that was the last bit. That was from the previous one. Not a very good job by Peter Windsor there of getting rid of that last thing about Alpine. Let me just do that. Sorry. Okay, back again. Is he? I don't think he is beating Oscar consistently. I think obviously he's had results at the moment, but if you look at what's going on, if I was Lando, I'd be thinking, this guy is seriously quick. I need to be talking to Zach about what we're going to do about this, and that's what he's going to have to do. And I think, I don't think you could say Lando has been consistently beating Oscar. I wouldn't say that. I would say the contrary. I'd say Oscar has been showing that he is quite capable of beating Lando and proving himself to be one of the great stars of the future. I mean, this is, if you wanted the parallel, to me, this is very like that first year of Jackie Stewart at BRM alongside Graham Hill, when Graham was still quite capable of winning Grand Prix, and he drove one of his best races ever at Monaco 65. But Jackie Stewart, virtually from the start, was very close to him, and then as soon as Graham had a problem, he was up there winning races or finishing ahead of him and doing a very, very good job and winning a Grand Prix by the end of the year. So I think, I'm not saying they're going to win Grand Prix. They could do it. I mean, they're not that far away, are they? All it needs is for Red Bull to have a bit of a bad weekend, and McLaren are going to be right there. But at the moment, if you say McLaren's going to win a Grand Prix in the next 4 months, it could well be Oscar Piastri and not Lando Norris, in my view. You know, he's that good. It looks like we got a very nice question here. If I can go to that one. This is from an amazing, amazing gentleman currently in Colombia, whose name is Helmut Marko's Natural Charm. Thank you very much, Osmond. Very kind. Lando seems to lack the maturity. I'm going to put this up, obviously. So put this up. Where are we? Yeah, okay. Okay, this is from Osman. I'll actually go back and get your name. I think I have to do a separate cut and paste, and I remember that now for these ones. Here we go. Copy and paste. Sorry. Here we go. Sorry about all this, but not my fault. I'm a Mac guy, as I say. You can't blame me for that, can you? Really? Or can you? I suppose all you PC guys can. There you go. It's from Helmut Marko's Natural Charm. Lando seems to lack the maturity that Oscar naturally has. Oscar will prevail. Given the Alpine mess, can Oscar and Aussie Grit now be forgiven? I think you've got to take your hat off to Aussie Grit for extricating Oscar from that situation, because it was the obvious step to do. If there was a half a chance at McLaren, you get him in there. I repeat my point. I think it could have been handled better, and I think only because to walk away from a race team that's just confirmed you're its driver and you're a young guy and you haven't even raced is a difficult thing for all those other young guys out there who don't have a drive and never will to see. That was my point throughout the whole thing, because regardless of what was the contractual situation or what was said verbally or orally, the reality was he did have the drive. So if you took a guess, they're not replying to emails, they're not doing this, not doing that, we got to get out of there. But if you took the guess, but will they be true to their word when it really comes down to it? Will they give them the drive? And you thought, no, they won't. The reality is they did. He would have been racing for Alpine, but he's much better off at McLaren. I'm the first to say that, and he was, from the minute he was in that car, he was better. I mean, obviously it meant the end of Daniel Ricciardo's career at McLaren, and it's possibly going to radically affect the career of Lando Norris. So it's got a lot of knock-on effects, this whole thing. And it meant 2 French drivers in at Alpine as well, which was, as we can see, they've run into one another twice now. It's year's only half over. So a lot of things happened as a result of that. But yeah, Aussie Grit, always forgive Aussie Grit. Will he forgive us is the question. I suspect he will. He's a good man. And Oscar, I think Oscar just kept very commendably quiet through the whole thing, didn't he? And just got on with it and got to know the McLaren boys in the right way and girls. And Bob's your uncle. Yeah, I'm in there, mate. Doing a good job. Yeah. Now, talking about pulse rates with Iwasa, I'd love to see a pulse rate on Oscar Piastri. I'd be shocked if it ever goes over 100. Absolutely shocked. Beneath, there's another one here. Oh, it's gone now, sorry. But there was another one up there. It seems to have gone. Sorry, Beneath, coloured one that is. Beneath P, let's see what this one is. When you ask long questions, it obviously takes me longer to trim the lines to fit. Not that I'm asking for shorter questions, I'm just saying, I'm explaining why you sometimes see me looking like a zombie doing this. So, here we go. This is from Beneath P. Hi Peter, as always, thanks for the stream. You had mentioned that Alan Prost was a short corner driver with a lot of margin, unlike Hamilton or Verstappen. Do you think he did that on purpose? Yeah, I think he, yes, on purpose, not from a safety point of view, but from a growing up with Michelin and having their tyres going off quite quickly every other race point of view, and also I've got to finish every race. I've got more chance of scoring points and winning races and championships if I finish every race. And I think it was that. I mean, don't get me wrong, Prost, and because he was a very good short corner driver, it's a bit like Max could afford to be as slow as he was through sectors 1 and 2 at Spa, sectors 1 and 3 at Spa, because he was so good through sector 2. Because Prost was so good, leaving margin didn't mean that he was slow. It just meant that he was unbelievably consistent and he could reproduce what he was doing for lap after lap after lap. And you very rarely saw him locking brakes or doing anything. Everything was beautifully timed, and everything seemed to happen in slow motion with Prost after a while. I mean, in the McLaren, his first year, it was a terrible car. But even then, you never really saw Prost on the edge, reflexy and doing it and sort of asking of the car more than the car was capable of giving. Even then, he was driving within a margin and an envelope that he knew he could reproduce. And John Watson, his teammate that year, was very fast, very, very good driver, fingertippy driver, lovely inputs as well, but very much a... If I had to compare John with anyone, I'd say he was a bit like Sebastian Vettel. He was quite orientated to the front of the car and could live with understeer very well, but he was right on the edge, John. I mean, you always felt, it's John, oh yeah, beautiful. And it wasn't ragged, it was just like, it was like, oh, hope he's going to be all right sort of thing. Whereas Prost always seemed to be on top of the car, a bit like Alonso is always on top of the car once he's got that initial turn in. So, that's what Prost was like. He was... Yeah, I mean, as I said with that story of Frank going out to watch him and not even realising he was on a quick lap, everything was on rails with Prost, literally. He was very impressive to watch like that. So, next one. Here we go. This is going to be quite a fun. I can see what this one's all about. It's going to be a fun thing to try and pull off, that's for sure. Joe Spiker, F8. Hi Peter, thanks for your analyses. Thank you very much. Could you do a video with Rob Wilson on what he does and how he looks at driving? Maybe a video on track. Well, actually, I have done. So if you go to my channel after this video and search for, I guess if you put the Rob Wilson search thing in there, I certainly did one. I did one with my guys, Julian and Mark. Very good one. From their point of view, they really went for it and filmed it really well. So there's 3 or 4 on my channel in which you see Rob at work at Bruntingthorpe, talking about gentle firm and with the brakes and a lot of the things, short corners, rates of input. You can see it all there. As for doing one now, it would be lovely now to press on. Oh, here's Rob. Yeah, he's on WhatsApp. We're going to bring him in now, or Zoom. Let's talk to Rob. Yeah, right. Rob is to modern computers what front engine racing cars are to today's engineers. He's just not into technology, computer technology anyway. So getting Rob to do a Zoom call is impossible, really. I can do an audio thing with him but if he's just holding his mobile phone up, but anything else. I'm not in any way being disparaging. All I'm saying is Rob's got better things to do than worry about how to work computers and Zoom. So that's why I don't do very much with him on these sorts of shows, but we talk a lot and we have a laugh. Usually it's along the lines of, who was really quicker, Jim Palmer or Graham Lawrence over one lap? and we'd have a sort of half an hour discussion about it. These are two New Zealand racing drivers from the 60s, in case you didn't know. And it goes on like that, you know. Was Denny Hulme circa 1968 quicker or slower than Denny Hulme circa 1972? You know, and we'd go into a half-hour discussion about that. Lovely stuff. Classic Rob. He's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And I got to say, a big handout, a big shout-out to Boyo, Anthony Hyatt, Boyo of Double R, who's a big Rob fan and has bailed Rob out a number of sticky situations, not the least of which was recent. I think I mentioned it actually. He was supposed to do a day with one of the top F1 drivers, or one of the F1 drivers, and Rob's regular car that he was going to do it in had a problem, and Boyo went out and bought I can't remember. I think it was a Mazda MX-5 or something like that. He bought one for Rob to use for the day, then sold it 2 days later. Mega ex-Rob Wilson. And this Formula One driver probably made a big profit knowing Boyer. Brilliant. Right, here's another one. How are we doing for time? Only half an hour to go. 25 minutes to go, and I can go and have dinner. Mega. Good. I'll be back doing more of this stuff, don't worry. Got the August break. Got the family to run. Dexter to walk. Dexter's unbelievably brilliant. Today we were out by the pool in the garden here, and there were two balls. There was the ball that Jack was playing with a friend in the swimming pool with, you know, the ping pong water polo thing. Not water polo, water ping pong. And then there was the Dexter tennis ball. And Dexter was more interested in the swimming pool ball because it kept flying out of the swimming pool of Rob. And I just said to Dexter, I said, Dexter, no, other ball, bring it here. And he did. I couldn't believe it. He just dropped the other one, picked the other ball up, and just dropped it at my feet. Brilliant. Alex Lomax. Hi, Peter. Always enjoy your live streams. What is your opinion on the rumours about Charles signing a contract extension with Ferrari? Nowhere else to go. Sainz will be upset. No, I don't think Carlos will be upset because he's a bit like Fernando being there for Lance Stroll, isn't he? Every time he's near Charles or beats Charles or out-qualifies Charles, job done. And if Charles having a good weekend, Carlos cruises around behind, tries to beat him, obviously, and so it goes on, and they get on, I think, probably quite well. I think he's quite happy to have Charles there. And A and B, I'm not surprised. I'm sure he would, because it's good for his motivation to say, right, you know, no point, get on with it, Leclerc. You're going to sign a new contract with Ferrari. Nowhere else you're going to go that's going to be better than Ferrari. So get on with it. It's a great team. You can still do stuff. There's lots of time to go. Recharge your batteries, new contract, go for it. So I'd be amazed if that isn't happening. Nicholas Todd manages him, so I'm sure Nicholas has got all that sorted with the money and everything. And yeah, that'd be the logical thing for him to do. What else is he going to do? What else is he going to drive for? Alpine? I don't think so. Red Bull? No, not while Max is there. So Mercedes? Well, who's going to replace it? Mercedes? Nobody. So, yeah, that would be the deal. And hopefully he's using this to recharge his batteries. Not the August break, but re-signing and recommitting, if you like, to whatever the future may bring at Ferrari, which is always a massive question mark. Yeah. Right, back to here. All over the place at the moment. Here we go. So everybody's asking very good questions, aren't they? It's brilliant on these things. Superb how people love their Formula One and they go for it with the questions. Blaze 11. Lewis has been great this year. I would say him, Alonso, Max being the standouts considering their cars. Would you agree? Also, what is going on with George? He seems Bottas-esque this year. Harsh, I know. Well, Valtteri wouldn't be too impressed with that comment, Blaze. He went well in Hungary, didn't he? I think George is He's not going to be up there brilliantly quick every time, is he? And Lewis, as you say, I think he's got more out of this car since Monaco. I don't believe I kind of agree with Mark Hughes a little bit on this one. I don't believe he's running. His short corners are quite as short as they would be if he had a brilliant car that he could really rely on consistently from corner to corner. And I think he's very conscious of always getting the tyres to work and trying to get those in the window, and obviously having as much downforce as he can and running as low as he can and driving around that problem that may come from one circuit to another in terms of how low they do run, as I was talking about earlier. I think Lewis has done a very good job. Alonso's done an outstanding job, although the last couple of races Aston Martin haven't been as competitive as we saw earlier in the year, but Spa he was pretty good, wasn't he? And didn't beat Lewis, but he was pretty good. Not so good in qualifying, but he's been there or thereabouts. So yeah, Alonso, no surprise. I mean, I've been banging on about Alonso every time we've been doing video. Really, I don't know. People think I'm not pro Alonso. I've always been an Alonso supporter and fan, and love watching him drive. And I'm not surprised at all in a half reasonable car that he's going very, very quickly, very, very quickly. And who's the other one? Max obviously is a standout. And I would say Oscar's been the revelation of the year so far as a genuine future world champion, and I don't say that lightly. I think he is, and I think he's outstanding talent. Hasn't been a great half year for Charles, but I think Charles finished it on a high note, and he is still Charles Leclerc, and he will be, I think, if Ferrari are half reasonable, we'll see some good stuff from Charles second half of this year. So yeah, I think it's been a funny half year in a way, because Max has been so good. It kind of is racing for second an even thing, because some drivers like Charles are going to think if all I want to do is win races and beat Max, and if I make mistakes trying to do that, I will. So you judge them quite harshly. One could judge them quite harshly, whereas Sainz, as I said before, wouldn't have that approach. He would be, I just got to beat Charles. Different thing. And it's the same thing with George, really. I think George, if he can beat Lewis by a tenth or two, that's perfect for him. And that's not happening at the moment, but there's a long way to go yet. George will be back, believe me. He's not slow at all. Right. I just want to make sure I've answered this one. Yeah, I have. That's that one. Good. So this is from Robert Van Zandt. Get this one going. Right. Robert Van Zandt. Hi, Peter. Hope all is well. Yep, very good. Thank you very much. Do you think Max sim racing is a benefit to his Formula One racing? In other words, can he hone his skills even more compared to the others? Are other drivers missing a trick? I think Max probably, what does he get out of the sim racing? I think he's just a competitive guy that likes to win, and if he's not doing anything else and he's got the time to do it, doing that sort of hand-eye stuff and doing it well against competition kind of gets his adrenaline going a bit, and so that's what he does. I don't think that's necessarily, that would be any better for him than if he was doing some other sport or karting, for example. But it's an easy thing to do, isn't it? You're in the house, you got the seat, you do it. Whereas karting, you got to go to the track, the whole palaver. But I'm sure if you said to Max, on a day when he actually had nothing to do at all, would you rather sim race for 3 hours or should we go karting for 3 hours? I'm pretty sure he'd go karting myself. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's what he would go for. So I think in the sense that it fills a void that needs to be there, it's not a bad thing. I don't think it helps him at all in terms of being the racing driver that he is in that Red Bull RB19B, because those things can't be simulated. They're not there. All the things I talk about, all the things I've shown you tonight, those differences in the photographs you can see between the way Max goes into a corner and Perez goes into a corner, none of that can be reproduced on a simulator. So that isn't what the sim part of Max's life is about. It's about a little bit of competition, bit of hand-eye, keeping that a little bit sharp perhaps, and that's it. Have fun. I don't think it's any more than that, to be honest. So I don't think other drivers are missing a trick. But where they would be missing a trick would be if they're the sort of drivers that could benefit from improving the way they approach corners and their rates of input and various other things, none of which you can do on a sim. They're missing a trick if they're not finding other ways to do that. Rob Wilson is one way. It's not the only way, but he's a pretty good way right now. He's right there and he's with us, so why not take advantage of it? But if you don't want to do that, there are still probably other ways of doing it, and Rob would probably suggest other ways of doing it. That's missing a trick, in my view. I mean, I mentioned this about Nick de Vries. I think if Nick de Vries had done some stuff with Rob, he probably might still be in that car. He might have done a better job. So here's another one. Yeah, this is the incident in the sprint, isn't it? Do you think? This is from BovMD01. Hi Peter, do you think the incident with Checo Lewis was worthy of a penalty? Why wouldn't Merck bring Lewis in sooner for mediums with a free pit stop in hand? He would have had 1.5 to 2 second lap on Charles. Yeah, I'm thinking about that. Was it worthy of a penalty? No. I said so at the time. To me, that was a racing accident, partly because the track was wet, semi-wet, and the cars were moving around, and we want to see drivers racing, and those two were doing a really good job racing very closely with one another. And as I've said a million times, if you are on the outside of another driver, you are kind of taking your life into your own hands, if you like, because things, you might get a bit of understeer. The guy on the inside might get a bit of understeer. Should he get penalised because he's got a bit of understeer that's pushed him out a little bit and there's a guy on his outside and it's hit him? I totally disagree with that whole. I don't know how it managed to get into the rule book even. I don't know who was responsible for putting all that stuff in. It's been going on for too long now, and I just would have thought they would have got on top of it, because basically it's a license. If you're on the outside now, if the guy on the inside does anything wrong, he gets the penalty, and you're on the outside. Tempting fate. Just doesn't make sense to me. I'm not quite sure what you mean by if in that sprint race, if Lewis come in sooner for mediums, a free stop in hand. Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I can't answer that really. I can't really think that one through. You're probably right, but then I'm sure Mike Elliott's got a very good response to that. Well, we didn't think so at the time. Strategy didn't tell us that was the thing to do. Didn't do a very good job with that second part of that question, but anyway. Maybe they don't think about beating Charles. Maybe they're thinking about trying to race to win. Isn't that what they would do? Ben Cashman says, what's up, summer break crew? Yeah, right. Well, summer break, life's pretty much the same for me. Still working away, A and B, the exhibition and other stuff, lots going on. What a moment to spare. Yeah, Ike McKenzie says, Gazenti, sorry, I'm not pronouncing it well. I know more examples where they should have pitted Lewis earlier, like when they messed up on his 8th title by not pitting. Yeah, well, we won't go down that path now. I totally agree with you, but I don't think he should have. I think he did the right thing not to pit at Abu Dhabi. It's just that they shouldn't have allowed the race to be restarted. It should have finished behind the safety car. So back to M.A. Khan now, who's making a good point, I think, as ever. Where are we going with this one? I think you're kind of venting here, aren't you? And you're kind of agreeing with what I was saying. M.A. Khan, I can see why you've been saying George and Lewis will be a problem. George is simply not a trustworthy teammate. He ruined Lewis's lap despite knowing he made an error. Lewis has shown great patience. Yeah, well, yeah, imagine if they have a race-winning car next year and they both win races within the first 4 races. And then Lewis is leading Baku or something, and retires. Something fails on the car, and George wins that race. And then they go to Monaco, and Lewis is on the pole, and again doesn't finish. And George wins that race, and he's the toast of Monaco. All of a sudden, he's got a serious championship lead. And then they get to Canada, and Lewis gets held up by George. But no, George goes out just in front of Lewis and messes up George's lap. But George nonetheless is out there because he wanted to keep his tyres warm and gets the lap in. Do you think they're going to be good buddies after all that? And what do you think is going to happen? How do you think Toto's going to sort that situation out? There's no way George, if he's got even a sniff of a race win or a world championship, is even going to think about doing anything along the lines of being a good teammate to Lewis. No chance. Now, quite obviously, Lewis is a similar driver. Why would Lewis, but he is the 7 times world champion, and that's the point. It's going to be, if you want the 7 times world champion to be in harmony with everything that's going on around him, you have a Valtteri Bottas or a Carlos Sainz or a Sergio Perez in the other car. You don't have a George Russell. I've been saying that. I've been saying that till the cows come home, as my mum says. And I'm glad you agree. Yeah. It's going to be, if they do have a quick car next year, stand back. Definitely. IKK Kezigeti, sorry, again, they're coming in. It's a difficult name to pronounce for me anyway. Lewis is carrying Merck this year again. Really disappointed in George this year. He was quite on the pace with him last year. Well, yeah. I think you'll see George coming back. Fatal Fury says, interesting question. Any similarities between Verstappen and Schumacher? Again, I'm assuming you mean Michael. Yeah, both short corner drivers, definitely. Both, if you take Michael in his Ferrari days, both of them in complete harmony with their team and their technical people in the team, and as a result, moving mountains technically, managerially, and politically. Both of them thrive in situations where they have a number 2 that isn't going to be a problem over a year. Let me rephrase that. Both of them know that the team will get the best from them, i.e. Max or Michael, if the team focuses 100% on them, basically, and doesn't have a superstar in the other car. Not that the other car will be slow, it's just that you don't need a superstar in there. And both of them knew that. Well, probably Max is just watch what Michael's done, and so has Christian Horner, and so has Adrian, and they realised that was the way to go. So Michael set the tone, if you like, for that, more than any other driver, really. What else? I don't think, as I said before, I don't think Max would be as capable as Michael was of putting a team together the way Michael did with Todd and Ross Brawn at Ferrari. I think Max is a bit more of a racing driver, pure and simple, and because that's what he's been all his life, and that's all he's had at Red Bull. I mean, he doesn't run Red Bull in the way Michael effectively ran Ferrari for a while. He is an employee. He's a brilliant employee, but he's an employee, isn't he? And so that's a difference, I guess. In terms of driving, I think they're pretty similar. I mean, they're both very short corners, great rates of input, great touch and feel, very good in the wet, very good, very competitive. I mean, an obvious difference is that Michael went over the edge several times in terms of what was acceptable on the racetrack with other drivers, whereas I think Max is a purer driver and purer athlete, sportsman, who wouldn't do the things that Michael's done, although he got pretty near to it. I think it's only because Lewis was as good as he is that they didn't end up, T-boning. He didn't end up T-boning Lewis a few times in back end of 2021. And it's only because Lewis was very good at reading what Max was going to do and got out of the way. But that was the only time Max has really gone down that path, and he didn't really end in tears anywhere because, as I say, because of Lewis. So overall, very similar in technique, but obvious differences in other ways. Good question. Very good question. So you're going to get this question selected. I think you're going to be very pleased with this one. Ta-da! Because the first line is, I've asked this question every time and it's never been selected. I don't actually select the questions. I just do them in the order in which they appear, and I never get to the bottom. That's the problem. So please don't think that I'm in any way being fussy or finicky about what questions. Well, obviously I want a certain amount of decorum, please, and I'd like all the questions to be very nice, but no, but in reality, I don't select them. I just put them up, but I'd never get to the bottom, so I'm very sorry. Anyway, here we are, DLKR. I've asked this question on every show, but never been selected. What are your thoughts on doing on DQing a driver who is found to be disqualifying a driver who's found to blatantly wreck another car? You mean in the race he T-bones it, as I've just been describing, and then disqualifying the driver? Well, I mean, in racing it's difficult to do something as radical as that in the middle of the race. We have enough sanctions anyway. I think if a driver just blatantly T-bones, as what happened when Nick Heidfeld T-boned Takuma Sato in Austria, was it at the start of the Austrian Grand Prix one year? He sort of from 300 meters he just never braked and just went straight into the turn 3, and I think he collected Sato from memory. I think it was that sort of thing. If that happens, the driver, well, you've got to assume that both cars are wrecked, right? I mean, there's no way the guy that's done the shunting is going to be able to walk away, drive around in his car and race it. So what you mean is then they get back to the pits and then that driver is disqualified from racing. I don't know, Bernie Ecclestone wanted to disqualify Nigel Mansell in 1984 after the start line shunt in Detroit, when he was a bit like Oscar Piastri. He was caught in the middle of a Piquet Prost sandwich going into the first corner, but he made a good start as well. He was in the middle, and basically there was a 3-car shunt, and because one of them was Piquet in the Brabham, Bernie called for Nigel to lose his license until the end of that season. He got fined in the end and he didn't lose his license, but Bernie called for it. And of course, when Riccardo Patrese was involved in that horrendous accident at Monza in 1978 when Ronnie was killed, a lot of drivers called for Patrese to be banned for a certain amount of time as well. But in racing, the problem in racing, it's not a problem, but I mean, the reality of racing is that there are always other factors, mitigating circumstances, brakes, tyres, fuel load, steering, whatever, hit the brakes, nothing happened. To make snap judgments is very difficult in the course of a race. And so if it's going to be something radical like a driver losing his license for a period of time, then it needs to go to the FIA court, in my view. It needs to go right up to that level and not be something they would just decide on a race. I think the problem is we have so many disproportionate penalties now and other incidents with no results at all that you kind of lose track on what really is something that should be punished harshly and what isn't. I've kind of lost track on it because we have so many ridiculous penalties caused by drivers trying to overtake on the outside and then getting whacked by the car on the inside, and it's the guy on the inside that gets a penalty, as I keep saying, and that is so out of sync, I think, with the way racing should be, that the whole penalty thing is kind of out of control. Not much time left now. In fact, there isn't any time left. So actually, I don't think there are that many questions that I haven't got through. Maybe there are, but I think I've got through the coloured ones. I just want to make sure there are none that I've missed, because people very kindly. Real Race Talk has also asked one. Here we go. I've missed that one. This is from Real Race Talk. Thank you very much for this question. Let me just have a look. That was Dexter coming in, actually, telling me he wanted to go for a walk because it was time for me to take him out for the evening walk here. The lovely, warm, balmy evening we go for. Just trying to annoy everybody who's in the rain or the cold at the moment. And Spain, just interested. I mean, when it was 40, 41 in Italy and Greece, we had one day at 40, and then the rest have been, okay, it's August, in the high 30s. And the evenings and the mornings have been beautiful. So I must say, I'm very, very, very happy with the weather so far. And I get Jack out. We play golf in the middle of the day just to get the worst of the weather, build up the resistance. And we can do it. You have the umbrella, bit of ice water, towel, good stuff. Now that Lewis is actually driving the car instead of trying experimental setups to fix the W13, is he proving that George is not quite on this level? I don't know. To my mind, he's just getting the tyres to work a little bit better than George when they don't have tyre temperature. I think that's what Lewis is doing quite well. I think it's a fairly basic thing that he's doing. I don't think he's necessarily trying lots of bits and it's a complicated business and George can't get his head around it. I don't think it's that. I think George is quite capable of finding the right bits on the car as well, and I'm sure there's enough discipline at Mercedes to get the information from both the drivers and they know where they're going so far as they know what they're doing, assuming they do. I think it's more that Lewis is getting more from the tyres at the moment. I was talking to an engineer this morning about the advent of the new Pirelli stronger construction tyres since Silverstone, and saying, look, McLaren seem to be going better, Aston Martin not quite as well, Mercedes kind of, and Ferrari seem to have maybe improved a little bit. And he said it's quite difficult to know because all we know is roughly the information we get from Pirelli, and we make adjustments based on what they tell us, but that's not dynamic situation. It's just sort of physical things, A and B. How the tyres react anyway, the stronger, stiffer tyres react, depends entirely on what sort of aero package you've got anyway, and that's always going to be more important than the tyres. And so how much of an improvement McLaren have made, for example, since they've been running the stiffer tyres, is very difficult to judge. But maybe Lewis on the stiffer tyres has got a bit more feel for the car, maybe. But if he's got more feel on the stiffer tyres, then I can't imagine George wouldn't as well. That's because George is good. People who are disappointed with George, I think, should just... Not every racing driver, I suppose, is perfect at every race. George has had a couple of bad ones, but there will be some very good ones again very soon. Mark my words. Okay, so another question actually from Helmut Marko's Natural Charm. Another nicely green coloured one. Very kind. A little bit of dinner money there as well, which is very kind. So this one is... It's a good question again by the look of it. Peter, was turning Formula One into a ground effect formula a mistake? Fans can neither see or understand ground effect. As I was just saying with the flaws, current car's footprint of a Mercedes Maybach. Yeah. I don't believe that when the powers that be sat down to come up with a car that was going to make it much easier to follow the car in front, which was the entire premise of the 2022 regulations. I don't believe they suddenly said, right, we're going to go back to ground effect. I think they tried lots of things in the tunnels, and they worked on front wings and rear wings, and they realized how much turbulence comes out from the back of the car, and then they sort of gravitated to the downforce coming from the middle of the car. Oh, that's a bit like the old ground effect cars from, the old days. I think that's how it was. And having got that far, they thought, well, it's probably not a bad thing. We won't have skirts anymore, so we won't have that issue. And they can sort out the porpoising. They're good enough. They're all over 21. Let's go racing. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but it was kind of that. And of course, the problem is they're not all over 21, and they didn't understand the porpoising. But has it been a mistake in the sense that it hasn't produced the overtaking that the fans demanded? I didn't, just so you know, but the fans of the world demanded much more overtaking, which is why we have these cars in the first place. Has going to that car been a mistake? It's probably another poll coming up, isn't it? I think it's quite a good question. Do you think it was a mistake to do this? Because it was done for the fans. Do the fans feel there's enough overtaking now and it's all been worthwhile? Because if you don't, then why did we do these changes? They're big and heavy. They'll probably be big and heavy anyway, the cars, even without all that, because that's what Formula One cars do. I know they're trying to make them lighter and smaller in the future. Good luck with that. But I don't know. In my view, we should never have left. This is probably a good moment to leave the live stream. We should never have left V10s and all those engines, super reliable engines we had, which cost 12 million euros a year, compared with whatever they do now, 25 million a year. Because you could argue, oh well, the hybrid era is so much better for net zero and getting manufacturers into the sport. But think of the money that could have been saved by not doing all that. We could have spent that money going on net zero in other ways. So, and we'd still have a very spectacular Formula One, which was incredibly reliable and not that expensive. But can't go backwards, as my mum says. No point turning the clock back. She says at 101. She rang today. What did I think of the cricket? What did I think about England? No, what did I think about the umpires selecting a ball very unlike the one that was supposedly out of shape and thus favouring the English bowlers? It sounds like Formula One to me, Mum. I don't know. I'm going to have to pack it in now, guys, because please ask the questions again. Somebody said, oh, don't load it up top end before I go live. I think it's probably worked a little bit. There seem to be a lot of questions I haven't got through, which I feel guilty. But, feel it is 2 hours, and it's quite a long time for me to sit here, he says, doing all this. So please ask more questions next time, and I'll do another stream very soon, and we'll keep going on all this. It's been a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. Thank you very much. So thank you to you, to who am I thinking? To Jetcraft and to Pitbox.ie, brilliant IO, my two big supporters of the channel, fabulous companies. They'll be in the description below the video, and I'll be doing another one soon. I spoke to Scarbs the other day, as I say, and he said he'd be happy to do something again very soon. So hopefully I'll be doing something with him. And in the meantime, stay safe, have fun, stay safe, and I'll see you very